Have you ever stopped to think if the science of the human mind was, well, missing about half of humanity? Today, we're going to dig into a fundamental flaw that shaped psychology for decades, and how it gave us a pretty warped view of who we are. So let's just cut right to the chase with a huge question. Is the psychology that many of us learned about really the study of the human mind? Or has it, for a very long time, just been the study of the male mind? You know, the whole point of a science like psychology is to find universal truths, ideas that apply to all of us, no matter who we are. But what happens when the very people being studied, the foundation of the science, don't actually represent everyone? What if they only represent one specific slice? And that brings us right to what's been called psychology's man problem. We're going to look at how this deeply ingrained, male-centered view has skewed our understanding of the human mind pretty much from the get-go. The key term here, the big one, is androcentrism. It's basically the practice of placing the male perspective at the center of everything. In research, this means male behavior is treated as the standard, the default. And female behavior, well, that's often seen as something different, a deviation from that norm. And check this out. Sometimes a single number can just tell the whole story. 72. That's how many participants were in Lawrence Kohlberg's incredibly influential 1969 study on moral development. And all 72 were boys, not a single girl in the group. And here we see the direct result of that. In '69, Kohlberg puts out his theory based only on boys and says the highest form of moral maturity is thinking in terms of abstract justice. It took until 1982 for Carol Gilligan to come along and say, hey, wait a minute. She showed that women often operate from an ethic of care. It wasn't a lesser moral framework. It was a completely different and equally valid one that the male-only model had made completely invisible. So this leads us to the first of two major ways this bias pops up. It's a concept called alpha bias. This is when the lens doesn't just see gender differences. It exaggerates them and often ends up twisting different to mean inferior. Alpha bias basically acts like a huge magnifying glass on gender. It takes any difference, real or imagined, and just blows it completely out of proportion, often framing it as something that's just hardwired, biological, and totally unchangeable. And for a truly jaw-dropping example of this, we only have to look at good old Sigmund Freud. He literally argued that because women don't experience his Oedipus complex, they develop weaker superegos, which in his view made them morally inferior to men. I mean, that's a textbook case of alpha bias, creating a hierarchy where there isn't one. Okay, so now let's flip to the other side of this bias coin, beta bias. If alpha bias is all about yelling about differences, beta bias is about pretending they don't exist at all, and the hidden dangers that come with that assumption. Yeah, beta bias is way sneakier. This is what happens when researchers just minimize or completely ignore the differences between men and women. It's this quiet assumption that whatever you find in a study full of men will just automatically apply to women too. No need to check. And this slide is the perfect illustration. For decades, Psychology 101 taught that the universal human response to stress was fight or flight. Why? Because the research was done almost exclusively on males. It wasn't until much, much later that researchers focusing on women discovered the tend and befriend response, reaching out for social support. It's a super common strategy that was just invisible for years because of beta bias. So let's just put them side by side to make it super clear. You've got alpha bias, which exaggerates differences, and that leads to all these harmful stereotypes. And then you have beta bias, which ignores differences, leading to these flawed, one-size-fits-all theories. They seem like opposites, but really, they're just two sides of the same biased coin. Okay, but look, this isn't just about some dusty old theories in textbooks. This stuff moves out of the lab and has real, tangible impacts on all of our lives. So let's take the workplace. Alpha bias? That's what reinforces those old stereotypes of men being the assertive, natural leaders, right? Which, of course, contributes to the glass ceiling. At the same time, beta bias leads to companies rolling out these generic stress management programs that might totally miss the mark for female employees who deal with stress in a different way. And when it comes to mental health, man, the stakes get even higher. Male-centered diagnostic criteria can end up labeling normal female emotional expression as a disorder. Worse, drug trials that were historically done only on men can lead to women getting the wrong dosage, making treatments ineffective or even dangerous. And it can cut both ways. If a diagnostic model is based on female norms, it might miss symptoms in men, like aggression being a sign of depression.
So, after all that, I know, it's easy to feel a little discouraged. But the story doesn't end there. The good news is that psychology has been actively working to correct its course. Let's look at how things are changing.
So, how do you fix a problem this big? Well, it's a process, and it really comes in three key steps. Step one was just awareness. That started back in the 70s with feminist critiques that called out these biases. Step two is to reform the actual methods. New ethical guidelines now demand that research samples actually look like the population. And step three, the ongoing challenge, is to keep questioning those old norms and promoting new perspectives that give us a much richer picture. But, and this is a really big but, the work is not done, not by a long shot. This isn't just a history lesson. This kind of bias is still alive and well in cutting-edge fields like neuropsychology, where the standard human brain being studied is still, way too often, a male brain. And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. If a bias this fundamental could hide in plain sight for so long, right at the core of a science, it makes you wonder, right? What other hidden biases are shaping our world, right here, right now?